Savitri was born as a response to the world's prayer. This prayer was carried to the Supreme Divine Mother by Aswapati himself, and how the Divine Mother responds to him, and the response to his prayer is the birth of the avatar. Savitri is portrayed here as an avatar, as an incarnation of God. Now, as I said the other day, our tradition gives an important place to the notion of avatar, the incarnation, and we normally talk of 10 avatars, 10 incarnations of God. Now, in my view, 10 simply means many. It doesn't mean numerically 10, because other scriptures like Bhagavad talk about 22 avatars of the Lord. Now, the number of avatars is not very important. What is important is the notion of the avatar, the very idea, the concept of the avatar. Most commentators on the Gita, modern commentators on the Gita, somehow feel embarrassed when it comes to the notion of the avatar. They somehow feel that the notion of the avatar is cannot be rationally explained, and this must be an old superstition of the Hindus. Even Mahatma Gandhi, when he writes a commentary on the Gita, feels a little uneasy about the notion of the avatar. Whereas Aurobindo clearly says this is one of the central teachings of the Indian tradition, which really believes, since this world is God's, and God is very much in love with this world, and is very much concerned about this world, that is your progress and my progress. This is not an orphaned world where God says, I have come once, that should be enough for you. It's not that. He keeps coming again and again. Except that the general notion of the avatar, as I said the other day here, is that avatar comes to perform miracles. Now, God doesn't have to come first hand to perform miracles here on earth. Miracles can be performed in various ways, and it all depends on what you regard as a miracle. I have always emphasized here that the person you see in your mirror every morning when you shave yourself is himself is a miracle. Nature, through blind evolution without anybody's guidance, could bring about the formation of a tree from a handful of dust, and the same handful of dust, after millenniums, after several million years, formulate itself into a crocodile, then into a snake, then into a bird, then into an ape, then finally into a man, who is a tremendously complex organism, with his brain, which is the most complex in the entire galaxy. All this has happened, and scientists have a fairly detailed explanation of the process by which this has happened. And if this is not a miracle, I don't know why we should look for other miracles here. And the stories that we have woven around avatars, mainly Puranic stories from the Purana, have a lot of element of fiction to them, a lot of adoration, a lot of bhakti. All bhakti poets have written many of these. But the most important aspect of the avatar comes down to exemplify what it means to rise to the divine consciousness. He is an example of how given your weaknesses and my weaknesses, given the kind of body that you and I have, given the kind of consciousness that you and I have, how the avatar can rise from a lower level of consciousness to a higher level of consciousness. There is a debt that binds man to the supreme. We read this line earlier on. God has put on our nature, and in response we have to put on his nature. This is the mutual bond. We have to rise to his nature, and how to rise to his nature is what the avatar comes here to exemplify, to show. Now God is a very abstract concept, and each one has his own notion of God. I guess a human conception of God is bound to be different from a level of consciousness below man's and so on. And the avatar comes, if you really look at the notion of Dashavatars, whenever there is an evolutionary crisis, the avatar comes to show how to transcend this crisis, how to break through these limitations of the crisis. So the point I am trying to make is, an avatar doesn't come to perform miracles. God doesn't have to impress. God doesn't have to show that he exists by performing miracles. We, of course, want miracles because we think that whoever performs miracles is very strong and very close to God, and we would like him to be on our right side, so we kind of are impressed by these avatars. As I said the other day, the fact that Christ didn't disappear as he was being driven up the Mount Calvary, and he stood there, he was put on the cross. If, very often people believe that if Christ only had disappeared from that situation and had appeared somewhere else, Christ would have proved himself an avatar, but this is not true. People say that some time ago in my place, Hyderabad, there was a annual conference of some denominations of Christians. And so, as a kind of build-up towards it, they had placards everywhere, buntings everywhere saying, Christ saves, Christ saves. Now, Hyderabad is a very peculiar place where there are Hindus and Muslims and Christians and Parsis and so on. Some group didn't like this, and the next day they kind of mounted a counter-campaign to this and said, how could he save who could not save himself? That meaning, Christ couldn't save himself, how can he save others? Now the notion here behind it is very funny, because the notion suggests that if Christ could have escaped during that evening or whatever time it was, and saved himself from being crucified, he would have been an avatar. Christ becomes an avatar just because he allowed himself to be crucified, and in this excruciating pain that his body was shot through, he loves humanity and offers a prayer asking God to forgive people who perpetrated all this on him, because he said they are after all ignorant, they know not what they are doing. Now if you can exemplify this love and not talk about it, not lecture about it, but if you can really show this through your life, that is an avatar. When the policemen catch you and you just disappear, these people have done it several times, or anybody, escaping their danger. Christ would have been at best a Houdini or somebody, he just disappeared. But Christ became an avatar just because he exemplifies this great quality of forgiveness, forgiving people, loving human beings, even during that period of excruciating pain. And Aurobindo talks about Christ a great deal in many places here. So, this is the basic idea of the avatar. The avatar does not claim any exemption. He comes exactly like you and me. He inherits the same body as you and me, and yet, in spite of all the limitations that you and I have, he exemplifies a pattern of living, a mode of living, by which he shows how to reach a level of consciousness higher than the consciousness in which we live. And that is, in fact, the work of the avatar. So Savitri is an avatar in that sense. Nowhere is any description here of the miracles performed by Savitri. In the entire book, there is no description. So this is the first thing I would like to emphasize, that in Sri Aurobindo does talk about a great deal about avatars in his essays on the Gita, but he emphasizes the avatar comes primarily to exemplify, to show a way how to rise from the ordinary level of consciousness to a level of consciousness closer to the divines. And this happens, avatar comes, whenever there is a crisis in evolution. Yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bharat. Now, what dharma is the avatar exemplifies? You must ask, if 10 avatars came to uphold Hindu Dharma is the minority dharma in the world today. You see, with one avatar, so Christianity has been able to spread all over the world, and we had 10 avatars coming to us, but there is the Hindu Dharma is the minority, the Christians, Buddhists, Islam, and then comes numerically Hindus. So it means, therefore, the avatars have failed in the task that they wanted to perform. See, dharma here doesn't really mean any religion, in Gita's time, when the Gita was written, I don't think dharma meant what it means to you at the end of an English education. Dharma means to us Hindu Dharma, etc. This is a contribution of the West, and we have lapped it up. And so we simply think, when yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata, it means Hindu Dharma. It's not Hindu Dharma. It simply means a growth towards God. That is the Dharma, the way of life which moves you, which takes you towards the higher level of consciousness, towards God. So whenever there is a confusion about this, then the avatar comes to exemplify a way of life which shows how exactly to reach a higher level. Now this is the time an avatar has to come, because man is puzzled, confused, and he has reached the end of his mental growth, more or less, and he is in puzzlement. He doesn't know how to go about it, and the more he tries to solve his problems, the more difficult the problems become. This is a sign when it shows that the problems cannot be solved anymore at the mental level. Man has to push to a level of consciousness above the mind, and it is at this particular juncture that an avatar comes. And to exemplify this, in fact, the purpose of writing the entire epic is that Sri Aurobindo is trying to say, this is an evolutionary crisis that we are facing. It is not an ecological crisis, it is not a population crisis, it is not a crisis, nuclear crisis. These are all symptoms of a central crisis. That central crisis is an evolutionary crisis. Man's external growth has become so vast, so unmanageable for the inner being of man. It's like giving a child instruments and equipment he is not capable of handling. So we are little children who have godlike powers. Science has given us such godlike powers, but we are still we have still a tribal mentality. We cannot distribute what we have with people, share it with people who do not have it. We still have, possession, greed. This is not any one person. He's not talking about any one person, this humanity as a whole. And therefore, he says, if any of these problems has to be solved, it can only be solved by man rising to a higher level of consciousness. All these 6-7 days, various ways, I have emphasized this, that moral ways, educational ways, the normal ways of dharma, religion, bhajan, all these things are all good, necessary. We have benefited a great deal from them. But right now the problem is so severe, the problem is so difficult, that a new power of consciousness alone can show us the way. And this is in fact the purpose of the mission that Sri Aurobindo took up, and he exemplified it in many ways. And as I have been always emphasizing, the 40 years that he spent in Pondicherry, what he did, what he was trying to do, what he achieved, etc., are all explained here in his autobiographical section, which is the first 3 books of Savitri, which we went through in a kind of brief, cursory manner. Now we are at a point. Savitri is born, Savitri has grown up, but as we saw, no suitor comes forward to claim her hand, and Savitri's father asks her to go out into the world to seek the companion for life. Now, Sri Aurobindo is not entirely free in these things, because he has taken the story from Vyasa, from Mahabharata, and these are the contours of the story in Mahabharata as well. And so he has to stick to the original story, but What turn he gives to it, what content he puts into it, that is his contribution. As I said, Aswapati's yajna, which was described in 10 lines, Sri Aurobindo transforms it into Aswapati's yoga. And you see what kinds of questions are taken up here. Why is man here? Where has he come from? Where is he going? What is his destiny? Why is it that he is in ignorance? What is the way out of all this? All these questions, all these problems are discussed in that part. So it is not just Aswapati's yajna, it is Aswapati's yoga. And Aswapati is a representative of modern man. Aswapati is not a king from the Puranas. In fact, the Aswapati's concerns are as modern as your concerns and my concerns. As you can see, Aswapati is concerned about human unity. Aswapati is concerned about man's growth here, man's opulence here, man's happiness here. And the fundamental thing being, as I was saying yesterday, Sri Aurobindo is not concerned at all about heavens, about what will happen after our death, because as I said, heavens, he said, we have always possessed. It is the earth that we have not possessed. And the aim of my yoga, he said, is to make, in the language of the Vedas, heaven and earth equal and one. So, it is the terrestrial fulfillment. People have this wrong notion that if you turn to yoga, you have to reject this world, you have to despise this world. How can you be a yogi? You are wearing all modern clothes, you are using all modern gadgets, you are eating health food, you go to Swiss cottage for a swim. How can you be a yogi? Yogi is supposed to reject all these things. This is the fundamental mistake that our tradition has made. However, I would like to emphasize, this does not mean that you can be a real yogi, you can turn to God without submitting yourself at some stage to a very, very rigorous discipline. And we must regard this, you must see what the purpose of the discipline is. The purpose of the discipline, we very often mistake the instrument for the goal. Or, take for example, if you want to build your body, you go to the gymnasium and, do weightlifting. This is not what you live for. This is an instrument so that your body becomes strong, that's all. So what is the purpose of your existence? It's not lifting weights. You lift weights so that you get a good health, your body becomes harmonious. The purpose is different. Similarly, the purpose of all this yogic discipline, whether it is meditation or whether it is controlling your diet or all these things, is a discipline one has to impose on oneself, but that's only the instrument, that's not the goal. The goal is transformation of one's consciousness. Spiritual life is always a new birth, and new birth is not easy. New birth is always attended by labor pains. In this case, the labor pains are the pains which your old consciousness undergoes before the new consciousness comes out of it. And so all this is to be understood. Now, before I go on to this is a book 5, which is called the Book of Love. As I said the other day, love is one of the most, or the basic spiritual impulse is love. If you can really love one person, whether it is your son, your husband, or your wife, or your father, or whoever, one person if you can really love, really, you are almost at the gate of the higher existence. And, Indian tradition looked at the great opportunity family life gives. You have to live a family life. So you live a family life, it can be transformed into a yoga, just as Sri Aurobindo regards Aswapati's yajna as a yoga. Anything in life can be a yoga. See, people want to live a spiritual life. What is spiritual life? Is that something different from the ordinary life you live? Oh, I want to live a spiritual life. Oh, London is too difficult. I will like it. Where is spiritual life? The life you live, whatever life it is that you live, that can be lived in the spiritual way. There is nothing like a spiritual life which is different. Spiritual life, there are no worries. Now, worries are not in the world. Worries are in nature of your mind. Why are you worried? You are worried because your mind is afraid. Why are you afraid? As I was talking to a friend today, Nothing in life is given to us, without any purpose. And I am absolutely convinced of it. If you have an illness, God wants you to use it for a specific purpose. If you have an emotional crisis, that has to be used for a particular purpose. You can do that. So if you live your life and take the opportunities as they come, the trials of life as they come, and decide to use them for yogic purposes, the same thing can be a yogic life. There is nothing like a yogic life which is entirely separate. Oh, I don't want to live a normal life, it's full of problems, let me go somewhere. If you have problems here, wherever you go, the problems will follow you. It has been proved again and again. Oh, you're in a company where you think everybody is jealous of you, nobody likes you, nobody wants you to go up and so on. So the best thing for me is to leave this company and join another company. Lo and behold, within 6 months again, the same problems that you are running away from are repeated there. Because these problems, either your creator has created them so that a time has come for you to go beyond the problems. So whenever he gives an opportunity to try out and rise beyond the problems, we run away from the problems and go somewhere else. This is not the way it is. The point is, here in Savitri's life, we have now come to a point when Savitri is going out to seek her life's companion, and at the end of a whole year's journey, she meets this companion, and as we'll see, she gets married to this companion, and then when she comes back home to report this to her father, they find at that time Narad present in Aswapati's court. And Narad is a very interesting character. I don't know, you're all grown and brought up in sophisticated London, but if you have been brought up in an Indian village as I have been, and when there are the tourist talkies and the Puranic stories, whenever Narad's character came, everybody became very alert, because when Narad comes, it's the beginning of some action. Something is now going to happen. And so Narad is generally a messenger sent by the Lord. Wherever there is a implicit harmony which is to be realized, Narad comes to wake up this harmony. Very often the path to this harmony is through conflict. And that's why after Narad's visit, there is going to be a war, there is going to be a clash, you can be certain of that. Suddenly children all get up in Harikatha and so on. Narad came, when the Kathakar says Narad came, everybody becomes very alert and say, now what is going to happen? This is what Narad is. So Narad is present in Aswapati's court when Savitri comes and reports this. And Savitri is very brief and says exactly what she has done. She says, I have met the young man I was looking for, and this is done. I have now come to seek your blessings. I'll go back and live with him. Then everybody says, wonderful, you have done very well. Narad, being Devarshi, he has an easy access into the future. And so Savitri's mother and father, everybody says, oh, you are here, it's a very auspicious occasion. Why don't you bless this union between Satyavan and Savitri and so on. Narad also shows he is very pleased and says, Satyavan is an excellent young man. You cannot find a young man of his inner and outer beauty, and Savitri has been very lucky, etc., etc. But when he says that, Savitri's mother feels that Narad is withholding some information. And the mother's antennas are very, very active in these respects, very sensitive. So Savitri's mother says, Narad, you have been very, open in every respect, but one or two things you seem to be holding back. Please tell us what has happened. And then Narad says, Satyavan, in spite of being all that I said he was, he has only 1 year to live. This day returning next year, Satyavan will die. Now, the point is, Savitri has come to this earth to confront the problem of death. That is the purpose of her avatar. Now, if you have come here to confront the problem of death for mankind, how can you confront it if you don't experience it? And so Savitri has to experience this tremendous problem in her own life. It applies to all of us. We all come here to confront some personal problem. Some problem which is holding us back, which is keeping us down. And this problem has various manifestations, various faces. And so there is no running away from this. If you don't solve this problem in this life, it will come back to you and haunt you next life. You have no escape. We have to solve this problem. And Savitri's problem is the problem of death, which she wants to solve. Death represents here everything that stands against bringing perfection to this life. That's what death means. Death is not just physical death. Death is all negation, all rejection. That's what death symbolizes. So death comes to Savitri's life. And then Savitri's mother asks Narad, you commute between heaven, Vaikuntha, and the earth. You must be knowing all the secrets that Vishnu knows. Can you tell me why Savitri, innocent young girl of 17 or 18, why? Why is it that, and when she went out, I'm sure that at that moment there were thousands and thousands of eligible young men. Why did her chariot take her to just this one man who had 1 year to live? Couldn't her chariot have taken her to some other young man whose life is a little more fortunate, who has, a normal span of life? Savitri spends a whole year looking for this young man and finally ends up meeting just this one young man who has 1 year to live. Why does this happen? What is the whole purpose? Why has God created this world? Why has He made this world so imperfect, so full of pain and suffering and evil? Does God enjoy, torturing us like this? Why did God create this world? Well, a problem all of us someday ask. Why me? Why this particular problem, why this particular difficulty has been placed in my life? What is it I have done wrong? I have done the best I could in my life. I have not harmed anybody. But why is this tragedy my fate? Is there any answer to this? So Narad asks this question, Savitri's mother asks this question to Narad. In other words, he is asking, is there any reason, purpose, which explains the presence of evil, suffering, and pain in this world? Or God looks at all this pain, suffering, and evil and is helpless to do anything about it? Either He is helpless to do anything about it and therefore He does nothing about it, or He is so callous, He is so cruel that He can do something about it but He doesn't. One of these things must be true. This is one of the problems raised by 19th century European philosophers. European philosophers didn't know anything about the Hindu God. They only talked about the Christian God. And so they always talk about this. God must be either all-merciful, all-knowing, all-powerful. If God is all this, how can you explain this world? Because nobody can deny that there is so much pain in this world, so much suffering in this world, so much, so many things in this world which make our life miserable. God is not doing anything about it. The tragedies are not decreasing, they are only increasing as we advance in civilization. So they said, the philosopher said, either God doesn't care or God can do nothing about it. If God can do nothing about it, then they said, God is not omnipotent. We have to seek a power which is more powerful than God. Or if God can do things, He is omnipotent but doesn't bother about it, then God doesn't even have the compassion that I have. So why should I bother about God? So in any case, God comes out very poorly in this argument against God. And same thing, Savitri's mother raises, and there is a beautiful canto in book 6, Problem of Pain and Fate and Pain, where Narad explains in brief. Maybe we'll take it up tomorrow, that particular problem. Today I will just present to you some extracts, some passages from this part which talks about, first of all, destined meeting place. Yesterday we saw the 4 cantos. The last canto describes Savitri's journey through Aryavarta. Now the destined meeting place comes, and Aurobindo gives a beautiful description of this. This is Canto 1, Book 5. I'll just read a few lines so that you get the flavor of this part of the poem. This is on page 389. But now the destined spot and hour were close. The destined spot and the hour in which he is going to meet Satyavan, they were close. A few lines down the page. To a space she came of soft and delicate air that seemed a sanctuary of youth and joy, a highland world of free and green delight, where spring and summer lay together and strove in indolent and amicable debate, enarmed, disputing with laughter who should rule. Just look at these three lines. He says, what kind of season was it? What was nature like? He said it was a season during which spring and summer, he says, where spring and summer lay together and strove in indolent and amicable debate. There was a playful debate, a playful struggle between spring on the one hand and summer on the other hand to decide who should now come forward, whether spring should come forward or summer should come. So what he is trying to say, the spring is about to disappear and the summer is about to take over. So during that time, so the poet talks about it very beautifully, where spring and summer lay together and strove in indolent and amicable debate. This was not a fierce struggle. It's an indolent and amicable debate about what? Enarmed, armed against each other. Sometimes, close friends fight with each other, just for the fun of it. So enarmed, disputing with laughter who should rule. Is it springtime should rule or summer should rule? There are these great lines, a few lines down the page. A sigh was straying among happy leaves, cool, perfumed with slow, pleasure-burdened feet. Faint, stumbling breezes faltered among flowers. The white crane stood, a vivid, motionless streak. Peacock and parrot jeweled soil and tree. The dove's soft moan enriched the enamored air, and fire-winged wild drake swam in silvery pools. Earth couched alone with her great lover heaven, uncovered to her concert's azure eye. Beautiful lines like this. And finally he says on page 391, the middle of it, this was the scene which the ambiguous mother had chosen for her brief felicitous hour. This is where Savitri, who is a representative of the Divine Mother on earth, this is this place, this is the spot she chose for this felicitous hour. What is the felicitous hour? When she meets her lover. Love in the wilderness met Savitri. The last line of that canto says, love in the wilderness met Savitri. Then comes a whole canto which talks about Satyavan. I'll read a few lines. Page 393. How does Satyavan look? As if a weapon of the living light, erect and lofty like a spear of God, his figure led the splendor of the morn. So the lovely morning in that forest, everything was glorious. But even in that, Satyavan looked as if he is the leader of all this glory. That was the presence of Satyavan. So he describes Satyavan like this, as if a weapon of the living light, erect and lofty like a spear of God, his figure led the splendor of the morn. Noble and clear as the broad peaceful heavens, a tablet of young wisdom was his brow. Freedom's imperious beauty curved his limbs. He describes his entire body was so harmonious, so well built. Freedom's imperious beauty curved his limbs. The joy of life was on his open face. His look was a wide daybreak of the gods. When he looked at you, you suddenly felt the sun was shining. Even his look brought this kind of feeling on anybody on whom it fell. His look was a white daybreak of the gods. His head was a youthful Rishi's touched with light. His body was a lover's and a king's. In the magnificent dawning of his force, built like a moving statue of delight, he illumined the border of the forest page. The forest page, he was walking along the edge of the forest, and he looked like a beautiful painting somebody had put there. He says, looks like illumined the border of the forest page. Now, if you read all these lines, you will see how much delight Aurobindo himself had in nature and in all manifestations of beauty. One of the things we are prone to do when we turn to so-called spiritual life is kill our joy in life. Spiritual life doesn't mean making long faces, making your own life miserable, everybody else's life miserable. Oh, I don't want to see a garden, so it's a beautiful thing, I will get attracted, attached. Everything physical has its spiritual aspect. What makes it physical is that we are pulled down the lower aspects of it. Everything has the higher aspect also. So, God has given us senses. Senses have to be trained. Senses have to be shaped. And if you have missed this part of life, you have missed a great deal of opportunities for a great deal of joy in life. So, it's not enough to worry whether your children know enough mathematics or science. It is also necessary to see whether your children's eyes are trained, ears are trained, fingers are trained. This is very important. This is a very important part of education. And yesterday, as I was saying, there is no ban. Those who love God don't have to hate anything beautiful and joyous in this world. This is something we are prone to do. So I am emphasizing this, that loving beauty for its own sake, loving good things in its own sake, this is all a growth. In fact, this is the sunlit path of an individual's growth, sunlit path. When you see anything suddenly, anything good here, anything beautiful here, should remind you of the maker of all this beauty. Why are you afraid of beauty? Why are you afraid of goodness? Why are you afraid of all these things? In India, God is associated with poverty. God is associated with ugliness. If you make a long beard and you don't shave yourself properly, if you have clothes which are torn, suddenly you think you are spiritual. But as we are doing in Pondicherry, everybody has a clean shave. Everybody wears, if not very modern clothes, but well washed, well clean. There is a good laundry there, so you can give clothes. Everything is nice. So somehow this association must be broken. That spirituality is all negative. Spirituality is disliking things. As you can see, Sri Aurobindo himself took great pleasure in writing these lines. He describes nature. He describes nature as he takes great pleasure as he takes in describing spiritual experiences. So this is what I wanted to say. There's plenty here, and one of the things I want to say here is those of you who find Savitri forbidding, because the first three books which deal with Aswapati's yoga deal with experiences which are not normal to you and me, and therefore we find we don't know where we are. Such people should start from book 4. All this that I am reading, Savitri's birth, Savitri's growth, Savitri's education, all this that we read yesterday, I don't think is particularly difficult and you need any special training. And I've read now some of the lines we describe. Satyavan, page 394, about the middle of that page. I must read this because Sri Aurobindo makes it a point. You see, there is nothing like chance in this life. If you think that was a chance, this was a chance, there is nothing like a chance. For example, here he emphasized the fact, normally Satyavan every morning used to come out to the forest along a particular path and take another path to go home. That day, he made an exception. Instead of going home along the usual route, he took a route which he never took before. And because he took that route, he met Savitri. So what he is trying to say, Even Satyavan's footsteps were guided by a force he himself was not aware of what this force is. If that can happen to Satyavan, what about you and me? So very often we think, how did this happen to me? Whether good things or bad things. It's only bad things we remember, good things we don't remember. It is nothing like just chance happenings. The outstretched hand that I was talking about the other day, it is this outstretched hand that constantly guides you, pushes you. So he says, that day he had turned from his accustomed paths. For one who, knowing every moment's load, can move in all our studied or careless steps, had laid the spell of destiny on his feet. Every what you think your careless step, there is nothing you careless steps. You are made to be careless, your feet are guided. And who did this? For one who, knowing every moment's load, can move in all our studied or careless steps, had laid the spell of destiny on his feet and drawn him to the forest's flowering verge. That day, almost like driven, he was driven to that point, and that's where he was. Now, it's a very dramatic thing. Unfortunately, we don't have time. And not many people in my audiences I have found in many places that people don't regard this as particularly spiritual. They said, very quickly you go on to spiritual parts, as if this is all unspiritual. It's very interesting. He slowly builds it. Savitri also comes. Savitri just comes. He is sitting in a chariot, and the chariot is being driven. She sees Satyavan, but nothing, she doesn't register him. See, I'll read that part. Very interesting. At first, now Satyavan is described, I just now saw, and now Savitri is coming in a chariot. At first, her glance that took life's million shapes impartially to people its treasure house, along with the sky and flower and hill and star, dwelt rather on the bright harmonious scene. That beautiful morning in the forest, verge of the forest, she saw Satyavan, but it didn't register in her mind or heart. There was something exceptional about this person. She said, the beautiful sky, beautiful forest, everything dazzling, and this person belongs to this background. That's all that he noticed. It saw the green gold of the slumberous sword, the grasses quivering with the slow wind's tread, the branches haunted by the wild bird's call. All this she noticed. Awake to nature, vague as yet to life, the eager prisoner from the infinite, the immortal wrestler in its mortal house, its pride, power, passion of a striving God. It saw this image of veiled deity, etc. Doesn't notice anything. Later on he says on page 395, about 5 lines from the top, so might she have passed by on chance ignorant roads. You've seen him like an artist, whatever you see today, you store somewhere in your memory. Maybe 10 years later, 5 years later, when you are writing something, painting something, that memory, that picture comes to your mind and you use it for your whatever work you are doing. Similarly, that would have remained a part of Savitri's memory. Savitri had seen him. She must have noticed that he was particularly good looking. But you don't go around falling in love with every good looking man or woman. That has the alchemy, that thing has to happen. That didn't happen to her. She noticed him as a part of this background and must have said, what an appropriate background for a handsome man like that. That's about all. Nothing beyond this. He says, so might she have passed on chance ignorant roads, missing the call of heaven, losing life's aim. This might have happened, but the God touched in time her conscious soul. God touched in time, he says, her conscious soul. And then once God touched the conscious soul, her vision settled, caught, and all was changed. Aurobindo also is a beautiful passage later on what is called love at first sight, what people are talking about. He doesn't ridicule it. He says this does happen. But he says, for this to happen, the man must be exceptional. Man must be of exceptional purity. It's only the pure in soul to whom love comes in this form. I'll read that passage because we all hear about love at first sight, etc. When you read Shakespeare and so on, English literature, this is full of these things. But Sri Aurobindo also recognizes it and says there is that kind of thing. But he says for that you need a soul, he says, which is being made ready through a long tapasya. Love is a siddhi of a tapasya. That's the way he looks at it. He doesn't discard love, as something which is carnal, which belongs only to the body and so on. That may be the starting point. Then you have to go up beyond this. All this he talked about in this. It's a very, 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 very rich book. All aspects of love are treated here. So her vision settled, caught, and all was changed. A few lines later, all in a moment was surprised and seized. All in a and in that flame to new things she was born. In that moment, Savitri was reborn, he says. A mystic tumult from her depths arose, hailed, smitten erect like one who dreamed at ease. Life ran to gaze from every gate of sense. Can you beat that? Savitri, when she saw Satyavan, now something has happened, God had touched her soul, and she recognizes Satyavan as the love of her life. Now he says life wanted to see Satyavan, possess Satyavan, so it ran every sense. That otherwise the eyes wanted to see nothing but Satyavan, ears wanted to do nothing but listen to Satyavan, the body wanted nothing but touch Satyavan, all this. So her life ran, she says, life ran to gaze from every gate of sense. Thoughts indistinct and glad in moon mist heavens, feelings is when a universe takes birth. See, whatever feelings God must have when He created this universe, something corresponding to that arises in man's heart when he really falls in love. Feelings as when a universe takes birth, swept through at the turmoil of her bosom space, invaded by a swarm of golden gods. She felt her heart was invaded by a swarm of golden gods. Arising to a hymn of wonders priests, her soul flung wide its doors to this new sun. An alchemy worked. The transmutation came. The missioned face had wrought the master's spell. In the nameless light of two approaching eyes, a swift and fated turning of her days appeared and stretched to a gleam of unknown worlds. Then, trembling with the mystic shock, her heart moved in her breast and cried out like a bird who hears his mate upon a neighboring bough, whose trampling fast, wheels largely stumbling ceased, the chariot stood like an arrested wind. The chariot was going, and suddenly when this happened, Savitri must have either given instructions to the charioteer or for the horse, and suddenly the chariot stood like what? Like an arrested wind. Chariot stood like an arrested wind. Now this is what happened to Satyavan. Savitri, what happened to Satyavan? And Satyavan looked out from his soul's doors and felt the enchantment of her liquid voice fill his youth's purple ambience and endured the haunting miracle of a perfect face. Haunting miracle. Savitri's face to him was a haunting miracle of a perfect face. What made it perfect? Not, it was perfect, but the love makes it perfect. It's not, you don't have to go for a perfect face and fall in love. First fall in love, then the face with which you fall in love will look you perfect. That's what it is. So he says, the haunting miracle of a perfect face, mastered by the honey of a strange flower mouth, drawn to soul spaces opening round a brow. He turned to the vision like a sea to the moon, and suffered a dream of beauty and of change, discovered the aureole round a mortal's head, adored a new divinity in things. His self-bound nature foundered as in fire. His life was taken into another's life. The splendid, lonely idols of his brain fell prostrate from their bright sufficiencies, as at the touch of a new infinite, to worship a Godhead greater than their own. An unknown, imperious force drew him to her. Satyavan felt he was captive in the hands of a new force, and this is a new infinity. He had never thought there could be the touch of the infinite in a human face. This is the passage. I won't read this again. I'll give you some idea how Satyavan and Savitri meet. But I said there is a passage where Sri Aurobindo celebrates this love at first sight or whatever. I'll read that passage without this an experience for which you don't need someone to comment on. Everybody has this experience in some form or the other. I will read this. This same page 397, about 15, 16 lines from the top. On the dumb bosom of this oblivious globe, although as unknown beings we seem to meet, our lives are not aliens, nor as strangers joined, moved to each other by a causeless force. See, very often the lovers meet, they look, on the surface at least, as total strangers. There is no reason why the two people should meet and they should fall in love, because until that moment they were total strangers. And so this is the general appearance of life, that we seem to meet as total strangers, but we are not total strangers. That's what he's saying. On the dumb bosom of this oblivious globe, although as unknown beings we seem to meet, our lives are not aliens, nor as strangers joined, moved to each other by a causeless force. The soul can recognize its answering soul. This is a recognition that comes from the soul. The soul can recognize its answering soul across dividing time, and on life's roads absorbed rapt traveler, turning it recovers familiar splendors in an unknown face, and touched by the warning finger of swift love, it thrills again to an immortal joy, wearing a mortal body for delight. Suddenly, something touches your soul. As a result, you begin to see recovers familiar splendors in an unknown face. You are meeting that person for the first time, but you feel, I have met this face before. Not only once, I have met this face several times. Where did I meet this? That, he says, it happens. That is a recognition, one soul to the other. And he says, there is a power within that knows beyond our knowings. Knowledge comes from the intellect, from man's mind, but there is another kind of knowing, and that knowing comes from deeper within us, from a source. We are greater than our thoughts, and sometimes earth unveils that vision here. And then there are beautiful lines. To live, to love are signs of infinite things. Love is a glory from eternity's spheres. Abased, disfigured, mocked by baser mites that steal his name and shape and ecstasy, he is still the Godhead by which all can change. This love here is very often debased, disfigured, mocked. We make a mockery of love on this earth. But he says love in its original impulse, original vibration. To live and to love are signs of infinite things. Man can contact the infinite at your level and my level only through a vibration of love. That is why love uplifts you. Love is not possession. Love is not you know, taking somebody physically or taking somebody, making you locking up somebody as my possession. That's not love. Love is a glory from eternity spheres, abased, disfigured, mocked by baser mites that steal his name and shape and ecstasy. There are many false things that look like love in this world. They look like love. They also give you some of the same ecstasy that love brings. So this is mistaken for love. And there it says, he is still the Godhead by which all can change. Love is the Godhead by which everything in this world can change. A mystery wakes in our inconscient stuff. A bliss is born that can remake our life. Love dwells in us like an unopened flower. All of us are capable of love. What is it that has shut it up? What is it that has made our life so barren? Selfishness, egoism. Love is the only way out known to people at your level and my level of getting out of egoism. That's why it said if you can love one person, really one person, wholeheartedly, you are almost at the entrance of the sanctum sanctorum. It's not easy to love. Another name of love is giving yourself completely, not taking. The love that you and I meet with in life, also experience, has maybe a few moments of this inspired living, but most of it, it's a kind of compromise. You scratch my back, I scratch your back, some kind of habit it becomes. So we miss the whole thing. Here he says, if the real love comes, love dwells in us like an unopened flower, awaiting a rapid moment of the soul, or he roams in his charmed sleep mid thoughts and things. The child God is at play. He seeks himself in many hearts and minds and living forms. We all seek love through friends, through relatives, parents, etc., etc. But he lingers for a sign that he can know. And when it comes, wakes blindly to a voice, a look, a touch, the meaning of a face. His instrument, the dim corporeal mind, of celestial insight now forgetful grown, he seizes on some sign of outward charm to guide him mid the throng of nature's sins, reads heavenly truths into earth's semblances, desires the image for the Godhead's sake, divines the immortalities of form, and takes the body for the sculptured soul. And he says, beautifully, love's adoration, like a mystic seer, through vision looks at the invisible. Just as, in some people's case, you worship an idol, Krishna's idol, whatever idol you worship, the purpose of worshipping that idol is not that you will be imprisoned by that idol. The idol becomes a door and opens you up to an experience beyond that idol. So the idol becomes a symbol. If the idol were to enclose you, then you become an image worshipper. But if the idol, instead of enclosing you, brings to you an experience of the vast reality behind the idol, and then the idol has served a useful purpose. Love is exactly like that. You may feel you are loving a human being, but this human being is no other, nothing else than an idol. What you are really loving is the soul behind it, as Yajnavalkya says. Yajnavalkya's great love story, it's the greatest love story that ever narrated anywhere in the world. He tells his wife, a husband loves his wife not for the wife's sake, but for the soul in the wife. because the soul in the wife and the soul in the husband are the same. So we all love somebody primarily because it is the love of the soul to the soul, and all other things are just preparation. Ultimately, what is the love of God? What is it which you love in God? Is God a person? Does God have 4 hands, 8 hands, 6 hands? What is God? That's a consciousness. Similarly, every human being can be a representative. So just as you can find God by worshipping an idol, if you can do that, can't you find God by worshipping a human being whom you love? And worshipping is, what are you saying? I am yours, I am offering everything I have at your altar, at your feet. If you can do that to one person, and that person then becomes like the idol, a gateway to an experience of immortality, of infinite bliss behind it. That's what he's saying. Love's adoration like a mystic seer through vision looks at the invisible. In earth's alphabet finds a godlike sense, but the mind only thinks, behold the one for whom my life has waited long unfilled, behold the sudden sovereign of my days. Heart feels for heart, limb cries for answering limb, all strives to enforce the unity all is. The greatest source of our misery is the total imprisonment in which we live, imprisonment of the ego. And the more and more you get freedom from this hold of the ego, the more and more you go towards the infinite. We don't realize this. We always think taking is what will make me happy. Taking is what we want to take for ourselves, for our parents, for our religion, for our temple. We want to take. Nobody has ever found happiness by taking. It's only by giving. Because in the act of giving, what you are doing, the film of ego gradually becomes thinner and thinner and thinner. Once that has disappeared, there is no end to your happiness, there is no end to your knowledge, there is no end to your immortality. So that is why all saints have emphasized love is the greatest spiritual virtue you can practice in this world. And therefore he says, behold, heart feels for heart, limb cries for answering limb, all strives to enforce the unity all is, too far from the divine. Love seeks its truth, and life is blind, and the instruments deceive, and powers are there that labor to debase. All this is true. In the exercise of love, in the manifestation of love, there is a lot of perversion, there is a lot of corruption. Undoubtedly this is true. But he says, still can the vision come, the joy arrive. And then, as I said, all this love at first sight, falling in love and so on, he says, it's not easy. Rare is the cup, fit for lovers' nectar's wine. How rare is it? How rare are people who deserve to fall in love like this, who deserve to find this kind of love? Rare is the cup fit for lovers' nectar wine, as rare the vessel that can hold God's birth. If you can hold God's birth, if you can hold God's descent, like Chaitanya was able to. They say sometimes Chaitanya was one with the Lord, and he behaved like the Lord, he acted like the Lord. Only that kind of a purified patra, that kind of a purified soul can experience this ecstasy of love. The ecstasy of love doesn't come to a soiled heart. It can only come to a purified heart. And it is the same purified heart that can receive God's descent. So beautifully he says, too far from the divine, love seeks his truth, and life is blind, and the instruments deceive, and powers are there that labor to debase. All this is true. There is a lot of falsification, there is a lot of perversion. But he says, rare is the cup fit for love's nectar wine, as rare the vessel that can hold God's birth. What kind of preparation do you need to be ready to hold God's birth? The same preparation you need to experience love. What kind of preparation is it? A soul made ready through 1,000 years. A soul made ready through 1,000 years is the living mold of a supreme descent. So, love doesn't, it is not something that comes to every college Romeo. It's a siddhi of a great life. It's something worth living for, worth dying for. That is why all saints have talked about love, and love being the shortest cut to the Lord. So I said I would at one point show this passage of love, and there are many things here about love, and I don't think we have any literature in the world we have a greater love poem than Savitri. All manifestations, all aspects of love here. One aspect is the conjugal aspect, which generally people think doesn't come under the purview of spirituality. Notice the way Aurobindo is treating it. And he says this is an opportunity, the human relationship is an opportunity for us to realize this kind of love. And once you do that kind of, you have realized this kind of love, almost the next stage is you are face to face with the Supreme. Well, we have half an hour. Nanubai gives me 10 minutes more than we have. We go on to the next canto, where Satyavan and Savitri, so far they have not said a word to each other. All that Savitri has said is Savitri has asked the charioteer to stop the chariot, that's all. And the chariot stopped like an arrested wind, and then Aurobindo is describing the mental state, and then this great litany of love that we went through. Now Satyavan and Savitri talk to each other. It's a very, very interesting dialogue, discussion. If you ever fall in love, the first thing you do is you go on Baba, you go on telling stories all about your life. You say everything within as if, there is no end to time. You just go on telling stories. So Satyavan feels prompted to tell her about her past, his past. She asks, you look so royal, you belong to a royal family, what are you doing here in the forest? And then he says all the story that he is the son of Dyumatsena, and Dyumatsena was the king, but later in his life he lost his sight, he became blind, and when he became blind, his own courtiers, his ministers deceived him, and he lost his kingdom. And at that time Satyavan was a very tiny tot, so they all came to the forest, and Satyavan grew up in the forest. He says, I'm very happy, I don't need a kingdom to be happy. I have got Lord's kingdom here in the forest. And how he grew up with the nature, he grew up with the saints and rishis in the hermitage, all that he describes, a beautiful description. But I think I will have to leave it for you to read when you have more time. But one or two things I must read to give you some flavor of this. Satyavan describes his childhood and now gives an indication what the coming of Savitri has meant to him. This is on page 405. Last 5-6 lines. I sat with the forest sages in their trance. There poured awakening streams of diamond light. I glimpsed the presence of the One in all. It is my association with the rishis and the saints and the sages that it has instilled in me this awareness, spiritual awareness, that there is one supreme being who lives in all. But still there lacked the last transcendent path, and matter still slept empty of its Lord. Everything I knew, but something was still missing in my understanding. Matter, he says, still slept empty of the Lord. The spirit was saved, the body lost and mute. Until now, I had a choice. Spirituality meant for me a choice, either the spirit or the body. You choose one of these. So he says, the spirit was saved, the body lost and mute, lived still with death and ancient ignorance. The inconscient was its base, the void its fate. But thou hast come, and all will surely change. I shall feel the world mother in thy golden limbs, and hear her wisdom in thy sacred voice. The child of the void shall be reborn in God. My matter shall invade the inconscient's trance. My body, like my spirit, shall be free. What he's saying? I was only told the secret of making my spirit free, but nobody had yet told me the secret of making my body free. Now that you have come, I have the confidence. I will learn how to make the body free as well. Because as you know, Savitri is an avatar who has come precisely for this purpose. And so Satyavan has an intuitive feeling. Satyavan doesn't argue this case. I have an intuitive feeling now that you have come. The one thing that is missing until now you had to choose between spirit and matter. Now that you have come, I feel one doesn't have to choose. One can find God both in matter and in spirit. Not only will my soul be free, but even my body, which is the embodiment or which nature, matter has built, even that will attain its perfection. My body, like my spirit, shall be free. It shall escape from death and ignorance. Satyavan stops, but Savitri wants to hear more of this. He says, speak more to me, speak more, O Satyavan. Speak of thyself and all thou art within. I would know thee as if we had ever lived together in the chamber of our souls. Tell me more about yourself. I would like to know everything about your past. Speak till a light shall come into my heart, and my moved mortal mind shall understand what all the deathless being in me feels. It knows that thou art he my spirit has sought. I have absolutely no doubt. You are the one whom I am destined to meet. You are he my spirit has sought. Amidst earth's thronging visages and forms, across the golden spaces of my life. All this, and then he says on page 407 in continuation, last two lines, I looked upon the world and missed the self. When I looked at the world, I missed the self. And when I found the self, I lost the world. This has been the tragedy of all spirituality until now. Either you choose the spirit, let go of the world, or hold on to the world and be prepared to lose the spirit. I looked upon the world and missed the self. And when I found the self, I lost the world. My other selves I lost, and the body of God, the link of the finite with the infinite, the bridge between the appearance and the truth, the mystic aim for which the world was made. The world was not made so that we can choose either this or that. The world was made for an integral perfection, the human sense of immortality. But now, the gold link comes to me with thy feet, the golden link that is necessary to unite spirit and matter. That has come into my life with thy feet, he says. But now the gold link comes to me with thy feet, and his gold sun has shone on me from thy face. For now another realm draws near with thee, and now diviner voices fill my ear. A strange new world swims to me in thy gaze, approaching like a star from unknown heavens. A cry of spheres comes with thee, and a song of flaming gods. I draw a wealthier breath, and a fierier march of moments grow. Well, and finally, Savitri acknowledges and says, O Satyavan, page 409, I have heard thee, and I know. I know that thou and only thou art he. Full stop. She doesn't say anything more. I know that thou and only thou art he. Then, beautiful for its poetry. If you are not very impatient, you are not going to miss your train and so on. I could go on for another 10 minutes. Then she comes down from her chariot. It's beautifully described. And it comes down from the chariot, and it's like the English countryside. There are flowers all over the place. So she's collecting some flowers and weaving them into a garland. Right? This is what Sri Aurobindo is now describing. See how beautifully he does it. Then, flitting like pale brilliant moths, her hands took from the sylvan verges sunlit arms a load of their jewel faces, clustering swarms, companions of the springtime and the breeze. Then he says, a candid garland set with simple forms, her rapid fingers taught a flower song. Her rapid fingers, he says, taught a flower song when she was weaving the flowers into a garland. He says it's a flower song that she was weaving. Her rapid fingers taught a flower song, the stanza'd movement of a marriage hymn. Profound in perfume and immersed in hue, they mixed their yearnings, colored signs, and made the bloom of their purity and passion one. A sacrament of joy in treasuring palms, she brought flower symbol of her offered life. Then, when the garland was woven, then with raised hands that trembled a little now, as she raised her hands to put the garland around Satyavan's neck, her hands trembled a little bit, she says. Then with raised hands that trembled a little now, at the very closeness that her soul desired. Why was it trembling? Because this was the closest she had so far come to Satyavan. This bond of sweetness, their bright union sign, she laid on the bosom coveted by her love. She put this garland around Satyavan's neck. Well, then what happened? A few lines later, page number 410, he bent to her. When that was done, he bent to her and took into his own their married yearning, joined like folded hopes, as if a whole rich world suddenly possessed, wedded to all he had been, became himself, an inexhaustible joy made his alone. He gathered all Savitri into his clasp. Then what happened? Around her, his embrace became the sign of a locked closeness through slow, intimate years, a first sweet summary of delight to come, one brevity intense of all long life. In a wide moment of two souls that meet, she felt her being flow into him as in waves. She felt her entire being was flowing into Satyavan like a wave flowing into a river flowing into the sea. A river pours into a mighty sea. And then immediately Sri Aurobindo has this habit of lifting the whole thing up, as when a soul is merging into God. This merging of Satyavan and Savitri, the only parallel description is as when a soul merging into God, to live in Him forever and know His joy. Her consciousness grew aware of Him and alone, and all her separate self was lost in His. This is the purpose of love. All your separateness has to go, has to be annihilated, has to disappear. This is the fulfillment of love. As a starry heaven encircles happy earth, He shut her into Himself in a circle of bliss, and shut the world into Himself and her. Well, I've read whatever I wanted to read except now Savitri says to him, my heart will stay here on this forest verge and close to this thatched roof while I am afar. I have now to go briefly because I have not yet informed my father. Now of more wandering it has no need. I don't have now again to go to other places of pilgrimage. I have finished all my yatras. This is the end. But I must haste back to my father's house, which soon will lose one loved accustomed tread. Now that I go, my father's house will lose one accustomed tread, footfall, who's mine, and listen in vain for a once cherished voice. For soon I shall return, nor ever again oneness must sever its recovered bliss, or fate sunder our lives while life is ours. We will never again separate from each other. Notice how ironic life is. She says this, goes to her father, comes back, and she knows now that Narad tells her she has to spend a whole year waiting for the day when Satyavan will die. That is yet to come. It will come maybe after I return from Manchester. The program for us is we are meeting tomorrow morning at 10:30. And we'll finish at 12 o'clock. Then I will take a break, go up to the Manchester for 7 days. I'll be back on the 8th. Again, 8th evening, 7:30. We continue. Tomorrow I hope to do one more book. Maybe a little ambitious, but I think we have been ambitious in every way. And then that will bring us almost to the end of part 2. Then part 3 is the Savitri's yoga and so on. There is plenty to do. We'll try to do that after we come back from the 8th. And we conclude the series on the 13th of July.